I Travel Across America to Deal with Some Problems, Part 1, by Logan Burns 346. This has been less of a hobby and more of an obsession with mine for over 2 decades. I thought that it might be cathartic and informative to speak about some of the things that I've experienced in my travels. Now, I feel like one of the first things that I should explain is what I mean by deal with some problems. For lack of a better phrase, I kill bad things. And yes, some of these bad things are completely supernatural in nature. At least that's how most people would see them. Cryptids, folklore, creatures that dwell in the night. I've run into just about every single one of them that actually exist. And to be honest, they're kind of disappointing when you look at the immense amount of mystery and, well, spookiness that surrounds them. In reality, most of them are animals. Really hard to kill and ravenous animals, but animals nonetheless. There is a definitive reason that these weird things don't stick around too long and why they're rarely spotted. Most of them are dead, and the ones that aren't are kind of afraid of us humans. If you want something to pat yourself on the back about, that could be it. With that being said, that's most of them. There are some of them that are as conniving and malicious as any human. Even a few more so. Oh yeah, I should probably mention that a lot, and I mean a lot of the things that I end up killing, are just really messed up humans. Completely crazy. They're for the most part the worst things on the face of this godforsaken ball of dirt. I'm honestly kind of a vigilante with a side of monster hunting, I guess. Now, just because most of these things are either humans or really, really weird, messed up animals, doesn't mean that there wasn't a giant skill curve to get where I'm at now. I have taken a lot of big hits in the 25 years or so that I've been slaving away at this prospect of mine. You know what? That's probably a good place to start. My first injury. So, surprise, surprise, I was only about 3 months into this when I got this injury. And the only reason that it didn't happen on day one is because the first few things that I encountered were too anemic compared to what I faced then and there. I think I was in Missouri, some middle of nowhere inbred town that had some whacked stuff in the area according to the newspapers. It was in the late 80s, and I was fresh out of college and completely and utterly done with what most people consider a normal life. I was the same kind of snot-nosed teen that I kind of hate now in hindsight, but I digress. The information I had collected from the news was vague, to say the least. Pretty much all it covered was that not only were some dogs and cats turning up skinned on the porches of their owners, but now a girl had turned up the same way on the front porch of some poor family. A 10-year-old girl. I mean, she was skinned and gutted just like you would an animal you planned on eating. It was honestly not too great. What was almost not as great was the fact that I had nothing to go off of. No folklore I knew of, at the time at least, covered something that did this kind of thing to animals or people. But I knew I had to act fast. It was obviously getting a taste for people. And kids no less. I feel like all of you will learn sooner or later that I have a soft spot for kids. Even those aforementioned snotty-nosed teens. It tends to get me royally shafted usually. So that should be fun to talk about on a later post. Alright, back to this whole debacle. I had been in town for about 2 days now, sleeping out of my car because the meager amount of cash that I had swimming in my jeans was not nearly enough to eat and sleep in a bed. I chose to eat, obviously. This cramped sedan of mine was no place to be cooped up in, especially since I had to put on my investigatory pants for a day and get to the bottom of this thing before another tot got turned into some prime rib. What preceded could only be described as luck. Some sort of deus ex machina given to me by God or something, because I'm seriously not coming up with this for simplicity's sake. The morons behind all of this were literally talking about it in front of the Wendy's parking lot that I was living in. They were literally talking about skinning another kid that night at 9 in a Wendy's parking lot. I mean, I can't make this up. The perpetrators looked as retarded as you would expect them to be. Standard issue hillbilly morons from out in the woods somewhere. But I knew that I had to play it safe. I know I could have very well just tipped off the police and that these idiots would have cracked under pressure, but I was already kind of a criminal at this point, and I wanted to be a hero. I was 22, and the grandiose gesture of saving a kid from some nuts out in the boonies really pleased my ideals. I know it was stupid and put the girl in danger, but I decided to track the guys all the way to where they kidnapped the girl. I even allowed them to kidnap her, so that I could track them back to their lair, or whatever you want to call it. I kept telling myself that I have to track them to this hideout in case they have someone else there. It was just to see if there was anyone that was there. That's it. That thought process kept me going until I was finally able to finesse my way out to their old double wide out in the middle of nowhere. Now, I feel like this is a good time to describe myself a little bit. For some context, both of these guys were kind of squirrely, average height. You know, the usual affair. I, on the other hand, am 6'3", and at the time was in still pretty good shape from playing sports during college. I was a pretty imposing guy, especially to someone with an IQ of 75. Seriously, these guys were morons. From the dim glow of the fading porch light of their trailer, I could see them pulling some pillowcases with eye holes cut over their heads for some reason, and that's when I decided to step out of my car and make the 100-yard or so trek out of the shadows of the unknown and towards these completely oblivious morons. I took my handgun with me, a Smith & Wesson Model 59, pulled it out of my glove box and shoved it into the seat of my jeans, put the cigarette I was smoking out on my little ashtray, and climbed out of the driver's seat before marching towards them with a confident pep in my step. This was the first time that I had encountered something sentient, as the first things that I ran into were the aforementioned glorified animals, so I was trying to come up with some sort of line to say to these morons as I approached them. "What do you think you two are doing?" is what I decided on. It was pretty simple, but at least I didn't stutter. They kind of looked at me, bewildered, and I immediately pulled my pistol on them and racked the slide, flicking off the safety as I did so. Their bewilderment faded, and some sort of twisted, bemused look fell upon their faces as they glanced to my left. Now, this was an obvious mistake on their part, but it wasn't like it mattered. I turned to my left and there was this big guy along with two other guys of varying sizes. They had come out of the wilderness with the same pillowcase over their heads. They were literally right on top of me. I was literally so full of myself and what I was doing that I didn't realize that big boy and the brigade he had with him had sneaked right up on top of me, like I was deaf and blind. I made an attempt to rotate my body, to get aim on one of these fellas, but I was barely able to start the turn before the big guy grabbed my arm and completely stonewalled me from pointing my pistol in any direction. With his other hand, he took a swing at me. I saw it coming. He choreographed it pretty aggressively, so I ducked out of the way of it and slammed all of my body weight into him using the shoulder of the arm that he had on lock to ram him. Like I said, I was no small guy myself, so we both went tumbling into the dirt below. He held onto that arm for the life of him, which let me get a few really good hammer fists into him before one of his buddies put me in a rear neck choke. Now, these guys were inbred degenerates, and that was a fact. But I will give this to them. That guy, he knew how to choke someone out. I could quickly feel myself lose all of the strength that I had in my body, as my jugular and carotid were completely cut off from my brain. I had to make a quick and pretty dire choice. To my left, we had the two original morons trying to drag that poor girl from the trunk, and to my right was the other guy, seemingly headed towards the shed. I had no clue what that guy was doing at the time, and beneath me was the big guy. I could try to elbow this guy, but it wasn't going to do enough to get him to let go most likely, so my best bet was to try and shoot him. The only problem with that, if you don't quite remember, was that the big guy had my forearm in a lock with this giant baseball mitt of a hand. I had to do all of this with my wrist, and even with that, I was only probably going to get a gut shot in for him. So, with one quick motion, I leaned my torso as far right as I could and rotated my wrist as hard as possible. I fired once, and the dude let up, but I felt the sharpest pain in my entire life. My ears were ringing. My vision was still swimming from the near-death experience that the chokehold had just put me through, and now the meat of my left side had a scalding gash from a 9mm ball round. I very quickly flat-palmed the guy's nose, and it shattered on impact. He finally let up on his kung fu grip just enough for me to point the pistol at his sternum and lay to into him. Watching the light quickly drain from his already dulled eyes was pleasing in a morbid sort of way. I was up and at 'em pretty quick, all things considered, and my attention went right to the two dudes wrestling the poor girl out of the trunk. I hadn't noticed it before, and I didn't see it directly, but I know that one of those guys punched the girl pretty hard while I was wrestling with Tweedledee and Tweedledum in the dirt. I was going to lay them out with a couple of quick rounds, but they had the girl stretched out vertically in front of them. Now, I could have gotten a headshot if it was a bit lighter, if I was a bit more focused and not bleeding, etc. But I was not going to risk putting a bullet in that poor girl. Instead, I said it straight. You better put the girl down right now, or else, or something of that nature. They obviously didn't listen, and they continued to carry the girl to their house. I felt like these guys would have attacked me if they had the change, but it was becoming very obvious that these guys had no guns on them at the very least, and I was in control here. And then I remembered that there was one more of them here. The groans of the guy that I had gutshot had masked him walking up, and I turned just in time for him to lunge at me and stab me right through the palm of my left hand with the biggest knife I've ever seen in my entire life. I let out a scream, the likes of which you haven't heard, and while I did, the other two very obviously scurried away with the poor child. At this point, I had had enough of these morons, and I was bleeding pretty bad, in need of some jerry-rigged medical attention from the back of my Chrysler. I guess he really didn't think out his plan, as he seemed a little bit shocked when he felt 3 scorching slugs of metal tear through his soft bits. But I assume that he got the picture by that time, and he slumped to the ground and let go of the knife that was still lodged in between 2 bones in the center of my hand. I put one more round into the crying man with a bullet in his gut. I hit him square in the center of his forehead, and proceeded to tuck the pistol in my armpit so that I could jerk this behemoth knife out of my hand. A plume of blood followed it out, but it was relieving to have the thing out of there. It just didn't stop the pain, though. Oh yeah, a disclaimer. It is not proper gun safety to shove a loaded pistol with the safety off under your armpit, so don't try this at home, kids. It was pretty easy to find the other two. One was hiding at the back corner of the house with a shovel in his hand. I know that he was waiting for me, but he decided that it would be a good idea to mumble to himself out of fear so that I could hear him from a mile away. I just took a few steps away from the edge of the house, turned the corner, and popped him a few good times before he could rush me and crack me in the head with it. And man, I am glad I caught the other guy in time. He was about to start in on the girl with a knife when I found him in a clearing behind the house. There was some weird stuff painted on the ground, runes that I don't even know about to this day, and he had a knife beside him. He booked it when he saw me, acted like I was some sort of boogeyman. I liked the feeling. It was a pretty long shot, but I got him in the center of his back and finished him off with a bullet to the back of his head when I got close to him. The girl was unconscious when I found her. Her clothes were a little beaten up, she was muddy, she had a black eye and a broken nose, but she was still alive. I took her back to town and left her in front of the fire station, and I honked my horn for a good couple of seconds before peeling out of there. I did leave a note saying that I found her like this and preferred to stay anonymous, and that's all that it was left at. So, all in all, my first injuries were self-inflicted gunshot wounds, a stab from some cracked-up redneck in the backwoods of Missouri. I know this probably wasn't the most outrageous story to start off with, but I have plenty more where this came from. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please let me know. And if you have any specific creature or anything that you want to know about, I'll be sure to tell you about it, if I've hunted that specific creature or not. Whatever y'all suggest is probably what I'll write about next time. Also, my apologies if this wasn't quite up to snuff. I'm not particularly good at this sort of thing. And oh yeah, one more thing. Y'all can call me Kane. That's my name.